everyone, this is Katie the Novel Stitcher. It is Wednesday, December 28th, and this is a Flosstube Extra. So I thought I would come on and talk just about books for this extra episode. So no cross-stitch talking for this one, but I will probably film on Friday, December 30th, right before New Year's Eve, and go over what I've stitched in the past couple weeks and some stitching plans for 2023. So if you're looking for cross-stitch content, then tune into that episode, but this one's gonna be all about books. And what I thought I would do is share a little bit about my reading from 2022. I'm gonna go through my top 10 books and then share some books that I wanna read next year. So to start with, I read 21, and hopefully by the end of this week it will be 22 books in 2022. So not bad. It's not the most I've ever read in a year. The most I think was 52 maybe, which would equal about a book a week. That was quite a few years ago. This year I've been kind of learning to juggle my reading passion with my new cross-stitch passion. So cross-stitch has taken a little bit of precedence just because I've been really getting into it and wanting to do that a lot more. But I got 22 is a pretty good number of books, and you'll notice I'm in a different location. I'm working from home today, so filming this on my lunch break, and my desk is all that where I normally film. I'm all set up with my work laptop and monitor and stuff, and I didn't want to move it, so I'm kind of in my kitchen area. I'm in an apartment, so not a ton of places to film. I do have nice little built-in bookshelves over here that I keep a lot of my books in. So yeah. So first I can say that I keep track of what I read in a few different ways. One of them is to use either Goodreads or Storygraph. They are both apps that you can get on your iPad or your phone. I think Storygraph you can get on your iPad. I know a lot of people use Goodreads, and it's a really great one to look at book reviews, to check what you're reading, or track what you're reading. That is powered by Amazon, and so I've been leaning more toward using Storygraph, which is not powered by Amazon, because I understand that how great Amazon is. I use it too to get deliveries and to order things, but especially for my reading life, I try to use smaller, more independent creators, booksellers, bookstores, all of that. So Storygraph is, I'm not sure who created it. I think it was just a couple book lovers who wanted an alternative to Goodreads. And so they created an app where you can track all your books. And it has, I think, kind of like better stats than Goodreads. It gives you pie charts of, how many men am I reading versus women? How diverse is my reading? It can give you categories for books, like are they sad or enlightening or hard to read, trigger warnings if there's certain things in books that, make it hard for you to read. There's little warnings you can look up in case there's a certain subject matter that you just can't read at a certain time in your life. So I really like Storygraph, recommend it if you're looking for an alternative to Goodreads, or you're looking for something that is kind of built by book lovers for book lovers, instead of something that's kind of controlled by Amazon, which is just kind of a faceless company in some ways. But I do still use Goodreads sometimes. I have more friends on Goodreads, like more connections on Goodreads, so I use that too, but it's good to have options. And then actually, aside from digitally keeping track of my books, I also have a book journal. And so I've had this since 2006, which is kind of crazy to think about. I got it in college, went to the Barnes & Noble on campus, was looking for some books to read, and noticed they had little book journals, and so I picked this one up. So I have in here everything I've read pretty much since 2006, which I should probably take all of this and put it into a spreadsheet, because if I ever lost this, I would lose all of that information. But and I do have this one is almost full, and I do actually, interestingly enough, have a blank one, the exact same book journal that a friend gave me years and years and years ago, not knowing I already had one. And she was like, oh no, you have it already. And I was like, but that's perfect, because once I fill this one, I can use the other one. So I have that one. And so for this, there's a section for books to read. And so I have filled this out with all my TBR, to be read books, all the books I want to read, whether I own them or not. And so as I buy them, I put an asterisk next to them so I know that I own them, and as I read them, I cross it out. And if it's something like a library book or a loaned book, I'll put like a little note next to the title. So a lot of these, like, this is going back to like me putting down books to read in like 2007, 2008 kind of thing. So it has that section, and that section's all filled out to the bottom. And so then the next section is favorite books and passages, which I used to fill this out with pages that had like quotes and passages and things that I liked. Back in the earlier 2000s or years ago, I think maybe I've read so much at this point that there's not as many like quotes or passages in books that really like grab me and I'm like, whoa, I want to remember that or write that down. So I haven't been using this section for that in a while. So there's quite, I think like half of it, maybe more than half of it, has pages filled out. And then I was running out of room I ran out of room in my books to read section. So I actually commandeered this section for more books to read. And so that's where I mostly filled up. I think that section's pretty much all filled up. Yeah, I would have like maybe like a few pages here, but like it goes all the way to the end of that section with books I want to read. Much like cross stitch, where we have lists or wish lists of patterns, it's similar. I think I even decided in the last section to add more because there's more books I want to read than books I've read. But then starting in May of 2006, I removed this section. This is books borrowed lent. And I do lend out books sometimes and borrow books sometimes, but I just commandeered this for a books read section. And at first I just kept track numerically for 2006 and 7, 8 and 9, all the way until 2013 maybe? Yeah. All the way until 2013, and then I also started putting on the edge what month I read the book in, so I could remember what months I read certain books. And so I've kept track every year up until January of 2022. So that has that's my whole reading life in one book, which is interesting. And it just has the books I read and what months I read them, and somewhat, the books I want to read. No reviews or stars next to these denoting whether I like the book or not. Most of the time I can remember if I liked a book and like how a book made me feel, remembering plots and things. Maybe not so much, but so that's fun to have. I should probably at some point enter that into a spreadsheet, but it would probably take a while. But so for this year I read 22 books. And so I'm going to go through my top 10 of the ones I read. And so these aren't in any order necessarily. So it's hard to rank from 1 to 10. And this year was a good reading year. I wouldn't say it was the best reading year ever. And so it's really hard to pick like a number one book that kind of stood out as the best one I read. So no order to these. But I will start with my most recent finish, which I've talked about on past Flosstubes. So it's Invisible Child by Andrea Elliott. Andrea Elliott is a journalist. I keep forgetting if it's for the New York Times. It has to be for the Times, right? Yes, for the Times and the Miami Herald. But she started writing this or reporting on this, I think, when she was working for the Times. She follows this young woman, Dasani, who is living in New York City, living in poverty in a homeless shelter, and she follows her for about 8 years, from the age of 8 through like 16 or so, through most of high school. And it's a longer book. It's not a fun or light read. The things that Dasani and her family go through are really tough to read at times. The conditions of these shelters that they live in, the hardships that they endure, living in poverty, the ways that systemic racism holds them back and doesn't give them, the ability to push forward and move out of poverty. Some of what happens to them, not her personal, well, when she's a little older, some is of their own making, but a lot of it is failures of our own society, our own government, and our own kind of respect for people and understanding of homelessness that really holds them back and stops them from having the bright future that they should. And it's just fascinating to read about her life, to read about what it's like to live in a homeless shelter and be going to school every day and trying to pretend you don't live in a homeless shelter. The work that her mom did despite some addictions to drugs and alcohol and the inability to hold down a job, to care for her children, to make sure they would go to school clean with the best clothes she could get for them. You know, motherhood is hard in any circumstances. I'm not a mother, but I assume, and probably especially hard when you know you can't give your children everything that you want to give them and know that they deserve more, but don't know how to find a way to give that to them or find a way out of the circumstances you have found yourself in. If all you've ever known is poverty and all you've ever known is hardship, how do you work your way out of that or see a future? And so just beautifully written. I learned a lot from reading this book. You know, she's just such a smart young woman, smart girl, turns into a smart young woman with so much promise, but that promise is hard to reach for and grasp, especially because she's the oldest of 8 children. And a lot of what holds her back is caring and loving her family and wanting to be there for her siblings, and feeling like when she leaves them, because she does, and this isn't a spoiler, it's on the back, she does get into boarding school. There's actually a boarding school near Hershey Park that was actually established by Milton Hershey and his wife to help young children in poverty have a chance for success and go to school and be cared for and get out of that cycle of poverty. And so she does get into that boarding school, but it's hard for her being there because while she's in school, living in a house with other young women being cared for by 2 what they call house parents, by 2 parents who have stable jobs in a safe and nurturing environment where they have access to all the food they could want and clothes and toys and technology and all the things she doesn't have. She knows, like, back home that everyone is struggling and that her life seems kind of, it almost seems fake for her to be there living that life while they're, you know, still living in poverty and living in environments that are unsafe and there isn't enough food and all of that. So it's a struggle for her, and it's just a beautifully written book, and very powerful. So that's one of them. So the next book I'm going to recommend is The Book of Joy. This was a meeting in 2015 between the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu. These 2, before meeting in 2015, had met during spiritual conferences and had been friends for many, many years, but it had been a long time since they had gotten together. The Dalai Lama, obviously, it's very hard for him to leave Tibet. He is exiled there, and they are both getting older, and this is and I think was the last chance that they would have to be together as friends. And so it's just, they spent weeks together just talking about, and a journalist went with them and wrote about it and recorded all their conversations, just talking about religion and spirituality and their lives and just the meaning of life and what it means mostly to be joyful, because the 2 of them, despite hard circumstances, especially for the Dalai Lama being exiled from your country, you know, but still finding joy despite everything, despite all the hardships, despite all that they've faced, to just find those moments of happiness and the good in each moment and the good in life. And so it's just beautiful. Just if you need a book that's uplifting, that reminds us why we're here, or to find meaning in life and to find joy in life, highly recommend. I really loved this one. I'm going to have to put stuff on the floor, so excuse me for that. The next book I would recommend is A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. This book probably isn't for everyone. You really have to be into space books and science fiction and the like to enjoy this one, so maybe not for everyone, but I really enjoyed this. It is a second book in a series. The first book is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. That one is about a crew on a spaceship that tunnels wormholes, and it's crew of like all these different beings who have different cultures and different, who look all different. I mean, I guess you would maybe call them aliens, but all different kinds of beings that are in this world, and all their different personalities, and kind of how they all work together as a crew, and the relationships they form, and the ways in which they grow friendships and other kinds of relationships. It's just a lot of fun. It's just funny and fun. And so this is the second one. This one focuses after one of the events that kind of happens in the first book, and it focuses on just a few of the characters from the first book. So kind of, zooming in on them after the end of the first book, and where they are after, and what their pasts are, and kind of diving into them. One is the artificial intelligence on the ship. So she is a character in this book. I won't spoil the first book in case you are interested and say what happens to her, but something happens to her at the end of the first book, and this kind of follows what that means for her and her life in, after that in the second book. And it's just quirky and fun, really diverse set of characters who are human and not human, and I really enjoy this. I'm definitely going to be reading probably the full series. Becky Chambers is a great writer. So definitely, maybe not for everyone. Not everyone's into like sci-fi and space, but if that is something you like, check out Becky Chambers. And then the next one I'm gonna do is One Italian Summer by Rebecca Searle. Sorry, I just slapped the table. I actually saw her speak about this book. This was a new release this year in 2022. I've read a couple of her other books and really enjoyed them. And I hadn't been to an author event since before the pandemic. I love going and seeing authors speak and talk about their books. So it was such a nice night because I went with some friends and we got food and beer. It was at a brewery, a local brewery to me, and she came and spoke, and it felt so normal after all of the stress of the pandemic and not being able to do that kind of thing, that it was just like such a special night. And I think this book was great, but I think that also kind of like elevated the book in my mind. But it's not really based on a true story, but it sort of is. So Rebecca, the author, and her mother years ago went to Italy just to reconnect for a girls' trip, and her mom had been to Italy, I guess studied abroad or gone after college when she was young, and she had met someone and had a little fling, and then, came back and lived her life. And so when Rebecca and her mom went, they tried to see if they could find this man she had met when she was there in her younger years, and they did. And so that kind of, they just had lunch with him or something and caught up, but that kind of inspired this book. So this is about a young woman who's having some issues in her relationship, and then her mother passes away, and it's just devastating for her to lose her mother. And her mother vaguely mentioned, and I think she and her mother were supposed to go to Italy. They were supposed to go to Italy, but obviously, her mother passed away before they could go on the trip, and she has to decide, do I still go? Do I go by myself? And so she does end up going, and when her mom was young, she did visit Italy, and that's why they were deciding to go back there, and had met someone there, and had a relationship. And so while this young woman, she decides to go to Italy by herself I'm probably going to mispronounce the name. It's Positano, maybe? Positano. So she goes there in Italy on the vacation she and her mother were going to take, and it's got a little magical realism. So while this young woman is in Italy, traveling on her own and grieving her mother, one day at the hotel front desk, she hears a familiar voice, and the person who turns around is her mother, but her mother in her 20s. So magical realism there. She's seeing her mother as if she went back in time to when her mother actually was in Italy in her 20s, and just kind of gets to be friends with her mother and learn about her mother as a young woman. And it is an interesting look at a mother-daughter relationship where, for me too, I only have known my mom as a mother and a married woman and, the person that she is today. But I don't know who she was when she was 23, 24 years old, what kind of person she was or what she was like. You can obviously see echoes of that in who she is today. We don't turn into totally different people as we go older, but we do change. And so it's kind of like seeing your mother as if she was just one of your girlfriends, the same age as you, and how would that be and what would that be like. And so it'll definitely make you cry. But I just think it's a really beautiful book. I really enjoyed it, and also just makes you want to go to Italy and eat all the pasta. So I liked that one. That's just a lighter read. I mean, yes, there's sad parts, but for the most part, it's a bit of a lighter read. And then I have a list because some of these I don't have the book with me. So I'm going to do 2 audiobooks next. So the first one, I'll put what the cover looks like here, is the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This one's going to be a little bit hard to summarize, but basically we are living in the Anthropocene, like that's the time period right now. Many of you may know John Green. He writes young adult novels. The Fault in Our Stars is his most famous, but he has other good ones. And so this is nonfiction by him, and it's a collection of essays, and it's just essays about the time we live in, essays about technology, essays about a road trip he took, some essays about the pandemic, essays about friendship and family, and the things that connect us all, and funny stories, and it's just funny and heartwarming, and it makes you think, and it makes you learn, and I just thought it was a lot of fun, and I did the audiobook, and he narrates the audiobook. So if you're looking for a good audiobook to listen to, this one is great too because it's essays, so each chapter in the audiobook is a different essay. So it's a great one where you can stop and start, and it won't matter that you might have been a few days. You don't have to remember what happened in the last essay because they're not necessarily all connected. So it's a great little audiobook, especially if you have a fairly short commute to work. I think I did listen to it commuting to work, and I listened to it while stitching. So that one was a lot of fun. So if you like John Green and essays and nonfiction, recommend that one. And then the next one that was an audiobook is probably one of my favorites of the year. So I guess if I had to really put that list 1 through 10, this would be high up. It is the final revival of Opal and Nev. And I also did this one as an audiobook, and it was full cast, which means it's more than one narrator for the audiobook. Each character has their own narrator for the most part. And this one is about, try not to give spoilers or make it too complicated. And for any of these books, I'll put all the names in the description, and you can always just Google them if it's something you'd be interested in. But for this one, Nev is a young, tall, lanky, white British man who wants to be a singer, and he's a very talented songwriter, and he's a decent singer, and so he's trying to make it big, and he's been pretty popular, but his popularity is maybe waning, or he needs something. He needs a spark. He needs something to kind of grow his career and grow in popularity. And he's not having any luck in Britain, so him and his agent travel to America and just start trying to see who they can find who's going to give him that spark. And they're not having any luck. And then one night they go to a bar, and just for drinks, not for any other reason. And a young Black woman gets up on stage and starts singing, and they are blown away by her voice and her attitude and her spunk and the way she commands the stage. And that is Opal. And so then we follow a little bit of Opal's life, of her trying to become a musician and break into the scene. And these are not real people. And at first I had to Google it to make sure that it was fiction and not historical fiction, because the way in which this is written, and I didn't write down the author. I'm going to put her name down here. Now I feel bad. I didn't write down the author, but the way in which it's written, it makes it seem like these people were real, and this was a real band in the 70s. It's set in the 70s or the 60s, around that time period. And it's basically, I was going to stop and try to cut this. I kind of messed up the way I was going to talk about this one, but I'm not so good with the editing. I don't want to make a mess of things. So it is about these two characters, but basically the way the book is written is it's written as if a journalist is telling this story. There is a young woman. She's a journalist. She is the daughter of someone who was in Opal and Nev's band. They do get together and form a band, and she's the daughter of one of the band members. And she wants to learn about her father and about this band that he was in and about the past. And so she wants to write about it for Rolling Stone or Variety or some sort of magazine. And so the book is told from her perspective through interviews with the band members. And so obviously we start out learning about her relationship to the band, and then we learn about like Opal and Nev in their young years when they first get together. So Nev and his agent see Opal, love her. They think she's gonna give Nev the spark. Opal's like, do I really want to be like joining a band with this, you know, lanky white man from Britain? But she says okay, and they become pretty popular. They do pretty well, and it's just one of those like band dynamic stories. There's drummers and guitarists who are, you know, interplayed, and Opal and Nev and their relationship and their friendship, and also their non-friendship, because sometimes they don't get along and there's creative differences, and they have differences of opinions of what music they want to write and how they want to sound. And there's all that interplay. And then there's this young woman wanting to learn about her father and about the past and about what happened because something kind of traumatic happens. Opal and Nev decide to do a revival. There's other bands from the label that they're on, and they're all going to do a show together. And then there is a racist incident that happens during the concert that causes a riot, which causes other things to happen. And so this book kind of just goes through all of that and all of the different dramas among the band and with this event, and this young woman kind of trying to find out what actually happened during that event that caused the tragic thing to occur. Hopefully that all makes sense. I don't want to do any spoilers, but it's just really, really entertaining, both fun and serious. You know, it's, you know, music and all of that. So I really enjoyed that, and the audiobook was a lot of fun because it was like that full cast audiobook. So highly recommend the final revival of Opal and Nev. And then the last book I'll have to share here is I lent it to my mom, so I don't have the physical copy, and it's The Diamond Eye by Kate Quinn. Kate Quinn is quickly becoming one of my favorite historical fiction writers. So The Diamond Eye is set during World War II. Sorry. It's set during World War II. It's one of those things where like you read the book so long ago, you're like, you remember the broad strokes, but you're like, was it World War I or World War II? But there were Nazis, so it was World War II. Based on a true story about this Russian woman who is becomes one of the best snipers during the war and kills a lot of Nazis. And it's just really well written, so interesting to learn about women in history who she was a real person. And, you know, sometimes you don't always hear about these real life female heroines because a lot of times you hear about the men. And it's about, you know, it's historical fiction, so probably as true to the story as Kate Quinn could make it, and just about this woman who, you know, is such a great sniper and fights in the war, and her relationships, both romantic and not, with other soldiers and with other people in her life. And then at one point she comes to America and she goes on like a goodwill tour to kind of show the efforts that are happening with the war. She meets the president, she meets the first lady, and just tours around and kind of, you know, no one can believe that this young small woman would do what she did and be kind of a ruthless killer, but she is. And I just love historical fiction and thought it was really well written. I like Kate Quinn stuff a lot, so I definitely highly recommend that one. And then another one that I really liked that, again, is not going to be for everyone, and this is the third book in a series, is The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. And so this is a series. There are 3 books, so this is the last book. I had to reread the first 2 because I read them so long ago that I did not remember what happened in them, and I really wanted to finish the series this year, so I don't think I added those to my list of books read. I did read, maybe I read the first one at the very tail end of last year, the second one this year, and this one. So you could almost say I actually read 23 books. But that's not here nor there. So this is going to be really difficult to explain what this series is about. It's very complex. It is fantasy, sci-fi, fantasy, again, so maybe not for everyone, and it's very complex. So this is definitely not for everyone. If you've never read fantasy, do not pick this up as the first series you're going to read, because you're going to get totally confused. It's about a different world, and there's stones hanging in the sky. No one knows why, but they're up there, and they're from the past, and we do find out in this book what they are, sort of. And there's normal humans and stone people and other creatures, and it's basically about, I would say, like, broad strokes about a mother's quest to protect her daughter, even though she didn't really want the daughter. It's just about what a mother would do, regardless of their relationship with their child, to keep their child safe, sometimes failing to keep their children safe, and making their way through a world where they don't fit in, or they don't feel like they belong, and where people are ostracized just for being who they are, or being born the way they're born. Broad strokes, I guess. Just Google it, I would think. It's going to be really hard for me to explain this one, but just so well written, so beautifully written, so well written, she does so well with her characters, like real full character development. Like, they grow and they change throughout the series. There's one trick she does with timelines that's really fascinating, where you think there's 3 separate characters, but they're actually one person, and you're just seeing them at different points in their life. They have different names at different points in their life based on what's happening in their life, so that was really well done. I loved that part of it. And if you like fantasy and you've read a lot of fantasy and you're willing to try something that's challenging, N.K. Jemisin is the first woman. She's the first Black woman to win a Hugo Award. The Hugo Awards are awards for fantasy, science fiction. Very, very high level award. Not quite like the Pulitzer, but it's a big deal. So she is the first Black woman to win a Hugo, period, I think. And then she is the first either person or first woman overall to win it 3 times in a row. I don't know all of the details of that. Maybe I'll put it below because I feel bad. I know that she's the first Black woman to win a Hugo. She might be the first person ever to win it 3 years in a row, and it was for this entire series. So each book won the Hugo Award. It's that good. So highly recommend if you like that kind of thing. Not for everyone. And then I've discussed this one before in my Flosstube, so I'm just going to be real brief about this, but I really liked Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This was a book that I read on the beach, and it was a great beach read. Elizabeth Zott is the main character. She is a chemist. It is I'm really bad with remembering when books are set. It's like the 1950s. It's like women don't work and wear aprons and do all the cooking and stay inside. So it's like the 1950s-ish. So she is a chemist. Not easy being a female chemist in those times. Most people don't believe you're smart. Most people don't believe you can do it. And most people, sorry, I'm running low on battery. And so anyway, she's just struggling to be in chemistry, to stay in chemistry, and things are just not going well for her. Eventually, she meets someone who actually, another chemist who actually kind of understands her and the way she is, and she's a fascinating character. She's so well written, so she's very analytical. She's not very emotional. She is very, by the facts and tells the truth, and she's very blunt. And so people don't like her also for that reason, because she's just hard to relate to, and she cannot relate to other people either. So she's really fun to read about her, and hear her quips and her comebacks to things where, sarcasm, no sarcasm. She's just very straightforward and very honest and blunt. And she does meet another chemist who kind of gets her and understands her and believes that she's smart and capable and can do anything she wants to do, and they start a relationship and have a child. And then things happen there, and she finds herself struggling to make ends meet and to figure out what to do, because she is basically like pushed to the very back of her firm, or of the company she works for. They just want her to do like work that is beneath her, basically, for her skills and her experience, and they just want her to be a paper pusher. And they make her bring them coffee, the men in the office, and belittle her and don't think she's smart, but then secretly come to her and ask her for help. And so basically her daughter, she's a chemist, and she uses chemistry to create amazing food. She starts kind of realizing the impact of chemistry on what you eat and what you can make that still tastes good but is healthy, and makes her daughter amazing lunches. And because her daughter has such great lunches, one of the girls at her daughter's school keeps stealing her lunch. So Elizabeth finds this out, figures out who the girl's father is, and confronts him and says, "Your daughter has to stop stealing my daughter's food," and realizes the reason that his daughter is stealing her daughter's food is because he and his wife have separated, and he is raising the girl on his own and has no idea what to make her for lunch. So the poor girl is like starving and eating gross food, and that's why she takes Elizabeth's daughter's food, because she can and she's hungry. And she's beautiful, so he's first enraptured by her beauty and her poise and her sense of self and her amazing cooking, and he wants her to do a cooking show because he works for a TV station, and this TV station is not doing well, and it needs a new program. It's going to get everyone's attention, and he thinks everyone's going to love her. And so she reluctantly agrees, but she wants to create a cooking show based on chemistry, where she teaches women, housewives, how to make delicious meals using chemistry, and how to use the brains that they all have and are not able to use because they're just housewives. And of course, this TV station, manager and everyone else, the person who owns the TV station, do not like this, because she's trying to make women think, and she's not being cutesy and pink with an apron, and she's kind of being rebellious, and they don't like it. But she gets huge ratings. The women love her. They're learning how to cook different things. They're learning how to use chemistry and math and all of this, and use the things that they learned in school that they've not been able to use as housewives. And I don't know. And other stuff happens, but it's fun. It's a fun one. It's witty. It is a little heartbreaking at times. Just, we all know as a woman, especially back then, it's hard. And I think a lot of women can still relate to some of the struggles. So I really like that one. Probably talked about that longer than I thought I would, but it's a good one. And then the last one I'll recommend, and I'll go a little quick because I'm running out of battery power, is The Cat Who Saved Books by Sosuke Natsukawa. Pronouncing that the best I can. This is a translated book. Sosuke is Japanese. But I've spoken about this one also before on Flosstube, but to make kind of like a quick summary, young teenage boy, grandfather owns a used bookstore. His grandfather passes away, and he has to decide what to do with the bookstore. He's kind of a loner. He doesn't have a ton of, this young man is a loner. He doesn't have a ton of friends, kind of just spends his time in the bookstore, doesn't really say much in school, nor does he really try in school. And he's deciding what to do with the bookstore and thinking, oh, maybe I'll just pack it up and sell the bookstore. I'm too young. How can I manage a used bookstore on my own? And it never makes a lot of money. He loves books. He loves to read. His grandfather did, but it just seems unmanageable, and he doesn't really know what to do. So one day he's in the bookstore, and a cat wanders up to him, and he wonders how the cat got there. And then the cat starts speaking, and then he gets real freaked out. And basically the cat wants this young man to go on adventures to kind of stop people from destroying books or ruining the point of books or the magic and power of books. And so he goes on these adventures to kind of save books. And the young man is joined by one of his classmates who actually does know he exists and pays attention to him and realizes he's not coming in, and she assumes it's because his grandfather passed away, so she starts bringing him his homework and lessons and things. And then she meets the cat and gets pulled into it. And the cat doesn't just help this young man save books, but it helps this young man kind of discover who he is and who he wants to be and make friends and things. So It's a little weird. It's a little weird. It is Japanese, but so it's a little different. It's a little quirky, but it's cute and it's fun. It's a pretty short one too. So that is everything. Well, not everything I read, but those are my top 10. Hopefully this video is not too jumbled. I've never done a fully talking about books, and you realize in the middle of talking about books, you're like, what was the character's name? When was this set? What happened? Why did I not write down the author? But that's all right. And then I'm just going to quickly go through, I'm not even going to give the synopsis for most of these. I'm just going to quickly go through a pile I grabbed of books that I want to read in 2023. So this one is in The Shadow of the Mountain by Sylvia Vasquez Lovato. I'll give real brief. So this, I haven't even read it yet. Nonfiction. She is a young woman who is called home to Peru, I'm assuming from the US. She's had some struggles, some hard times, including some sexual abuse, and she starts mountain climbing while she's in Peru. She gets into mountain climbing and she decides, and this is nonfiction, this is a true story. So she decides she wants to tackle Everest, which is one of the biggest mountains of the world. And she doesn't go alone, though. She pulls together a group of other women who have gone through trauma and abuse, and they climb the mountain together. Just sounds really beautiful and inspiring. So that's nonfiction that I'm going to read. This, I don't know what happens in it, but this is the sequel to Beartown. Beartown is a book also by Frederick Buckman, obviously, about a small town in Canada that centers all around hockey. Something tragic and bad happens within this small town kind of related to hockey, or at least with one of the hockey players, and it kind of tears the town apart. They take sides. You know, it's just about the relationships we build. It's not really about hockey. I mean, hockey is kind of the center, so it's a little bit about like sports and the passion for sports, but like kind of how things can divide us, but yet not break us, and how we form community and what community means and what friendships mean. And it's hard to explain, but it's just one of those books that just captures your heart. Maybe not everyone's heart, because I know some people who read it who weren't so into it, or who have read Bachman and he's not for them. This is quite different than his other books. So if you've read A Man Called Ove, it's really, really different. All of his books he can have very different styles of writing. So Beartown is much more serious. It's a little bit more dark than A Man Called Ove. It's less funny, but it's just a really good one. I'll need to read that, and then Us Against You is what happens next. Really briefly, Shortfall, fantasy, read the first one. This is the second one. It is about a society where, it's about a young woman, which Robert Jackson Bennett, some fantasy authors do not do a good job of writing women. So I will say that he does do a good job of writing women, and this is about a young girl, youngish, teen in 20s, who has like special abilities. You can basically like you can inscribe stuff on objects, or tell objects what to do, and they will listen. Like you can inscribe on a door like unlock, and like when you say something it'll unlock. And so she kind of uses her powers to, you know, she's poor, she's living on the streets, so she uses her powers, and she meets up with a gang of different kinds of folks to kind of like make money and survive, but then also uncovers like some shady stuff going on in this world, and some bad characters who want to do bad things and needs to stop them. So it's probably like the worst description ever, but it's I like that. True Biz by Sarah Novick is also on my list. This one came out this year. This is about a school for the deaf, and I think it's just about the different characters at a school for the deaf. And so and she is an instructor of deaf studies and creative writing, and she lives in Philadelphia. So this one got a lot of buzz this year. Sounds really good. So that's on my list. Another N.K. Jemisin. This is her most recent one, The City We Became. I think it's about like an alternate New York. Like a weird New York. Yeah, I think it's about New York, but like New York is like upside down and all different. I don't know. But I just love her writing, so I will read whatever she writes. And I think it's supposed to be pretty good. I think that one got good reviews. Came out maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And then this one came out last year. It is a chunker, and I'm just gonna read. Okay, so this is The Love Songs of W.E.B. Dubois by Honorée Fanonne Jeffers. I might have pronounced her name wrong, so my apologies. But this came out in 2021. It's huge. But it got such good reviews, and not even good like reviews from critics and stuff like that. Like I'm on Instagram and review books and talk about books a lot on my Instagram. It's novel_Stitcher if you do want to follow me on Instagram. And I follow a lot of young women, well, young everyone, women and men, but a lot of people around my age who read and are very avid readers. And when this one came out, everyone was raving about it. So she's a poet. The author is a poet, and this is her fiction debut. It's a magisterial epic, an intimate yet sweeping novel with all of the luminescence and force of Homegoing, which is a book by Yaya Ghazi, Sing Unburied Sing, which is Desmond Ward, and The Water Dancer, which is Ta-Nehisi Coates, I think. Those are other great books by Black authors. The book chronicles the journey of one American family from the centuries of the colonial slave trade through the Civil War to our own tumultuous era. So I think kind of historical fiction, though I don't know if any of these characters were actually historical characters, but historical fiction in the time in which it is set. And just one of those sweeping novels that goes from long ago in the past to the present day. I can read like a quick blurb like Jacqueline Woodson. I like her a lot. Again, my phone is telling me it's running low on power. This sweeping, brilliant, and beautiful narrative is at once a love song to Black girlhood, family, history, joy, pain, and so much more. In Jeffers' deft hands, the story of race and love in America becomes the great American novel. So this is at the top of the list, but it is a whopping more than 750 pages. So, but maybe a good cold winter month's read when there's not much else going on to do but to snuggle up with a book. So that's everything. Sorry if this video is a bit choppy or not as great as my Flosstube's first time talking about books like this for such a long time, so I might have tripped over my words, forgotten some names and plot points, but hopefully I gave you some inspiration for things to read in the next year. Let me know what you read. What was your favorite book of 2022? If there's anything that you would recommend to me, or what are you gonna plan on reading? How many books did you read? How do you decide what to read? I'm probably mostly a mood reader, so I grab these from the shelves, and maybe this is what I was feeling today to kick the year off with for some books, but who knows if I'll decide to grab some others off my shelves. And thank you all for watching. My next Flosstube will be up later this week if you're more interested in the stitchy stuff. And I hope you all have a great rest of the week and a very, very happy new year. And I hope you get some good reading in the next few days. Thanks, everyone.